land where tears nor sorrows can be found. When I receive a mansion, robe and crown, just give me a mansion, robe and a crown in glory. You know there's peace and love will always abound forever. You ought to let me say to your throne surround. Lord, please reserve a mansion, robe and crown. The weather there is always fair. There's sunshine day and night. No cold, no rain will fall there, for the sun shines ever bright. I'll need no heavy garments, I'll just wrap my robe around. When I receive a mansion, robe and crown, just give me a mansion, robe and a crown. You know there's peace and love will always abound. You ought to let me say to your throne surround. Lord, please reserve a mansion, robe and crown. You know my head is bowed and bloody now from the work that I tried to do. But one day I'll be rewarded with a crown so bright and new. I'll wear a smile so bright, for there'll be no cause for a frown. When I receive a mansion, robe and crown, just give me a mansion, robe and a crown in glory. You know that peace and love will always abound forever. You ought to let me say to your throne surround. Lord, please reserve a mansion, robe and crown. Lord, I want a brand new mansion, robe and a crown in glory. There I know that peace and love will always abound forever. Let me be among the saved to your throne surround. Lord, please reserve a mansion, robe and crown. Just give me a mansion, robe and a crown in glory. You know that peace and love will always abound forever. You ought to let me say to your throne surround. Lord, please reserve a mansion, robe and crown.
I don't know about you, but I just rolled my sleeves up this summertime. I decided early this morning, there's no way in the world I'm going to wear a jacket today. It's just summertime, and then I thought I'm going to do okay, and I got in there and I said, no, I've got to roll these sleeves up. It is too hot for me. And I'll tell you what, though, God is good. Somebody asked me the other day, he said, you know, we never had a winter this year. And I thought, yeah, we did. We just called it spring. We just kind of jumped right over and, you know, totally skipped a whole season there. But as beautiful as it is today, we just sang a song that tells us how much more beautiful the afterlife is. And for the child of God, the person that believes in God, the person that has given their life to the Lord and has been saved through baptism, for that person, heaven has already begun. As a child of God, God has said, I'm giving you a mansion, a robe, and a crown. And it's not that it's something that you're going to get later. Yes, you are. But as a child of God, you realize God has already given me that blessing. God has already given me His place in heaven. And the road that is paved to go to heaven, I'm convinced we could really name that road the road of forgiveness. But because between here and there, there's a whole lot of forgiving that has to go on. Not only God's forgiveness of us, but what God teaches us about the life of love that we have in Him, where we learn, as hard as it is, to how to extend forgiveness to those that sin against us. And so this morning, I would call this lesson Extraordinary Forgiveness. We're going to look at a story very briefly in Genesis, and you're probably familiar with this story to some degree, but I just want to give us a little bit of a background and give you a little bit of a picture of exactly what I'm talking about when I say the word forgiveness. I think we overuse this word sometimes. I think we use it at times when we don't need to. And so if you would, read along with me as we look at Genesis chapter 50. It's actually going to be about 6 verses beginning with verse 15. And you know this story, the story of Joseph, from earlier in the text, because Joseph's brothers had become jealous of him and they had sold him into slavery. And not only was he enslaved, he was falsely accused, and then he was imprisoned. And some of, in fact, if not most of, the best years of his life, of his youth, were spent enslaved or imprisoned. And you remember the story because Joseph trusted God and God promoted him, and he actually becomes second in command of the land of Egypt. And that's a land where there's plenty at the moment. And Joseph serves faithfully the Pharaoh, and there's a time that comes where his family back home is in need of food, and he is reunited through an act of grace, through an act of mercy, through a reunion that only God could bring about. And Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and you know the story because they come to live with him and he cares for them. But then the day comes when their father Jacob dies. And that's where we are in Genesis chapter 50. And this is an amazing text because you will see the depth of what it means to forgive. What does it really mean to forgive? Verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs that we did to him?" And so they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died." Verse 17. "This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of God and of your father." That sets an example of how we're to ask for forgiveness, but look at the actual act of forgiveness. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. And his brothers then came and they threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid. I'm not going to kill you. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to try to get even with you now. Am I in the place of God?" he asked. What a powerful thought to come when you've literally got the people that sinned against you, the people that threw you into slavery, the people that sold you, when you've got a grasp or have the ability to have a grasp around their neck, to ask the question, am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, he says, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children, and be reassured. He reassured them, and he spoke kindly to them. Now, as amazing that is, just think how difficult it is to actually speak kindly in that situation. And so the question comes, what is forgiveness? What is forgiveness? Someone made this statement one time about Joseph. Even when life made no sense to Joseph, it made sense to God. And God was with Joseph. I definitely believe that God is absolutely a part of this story, that he is a part of Joseph's life. And so we have a choice of how we handle the act of forgiveness or how we handle someone's sin against us. We have a choice when we become angry. We have a choice when we get hurt. We have a choice when someone spreads false rumors about us. We have a choice when we're experiencing pain. We have a choice when we're mistreated. And God chooses what we go through. That is ultimately God's choice. I think that's one of the reasons Joseph asked the question, am I in the place of God? No, God chooses what I go through. But we choose how we go through it. We choose how we go through it. Think about it. We choose what our attitude's going to be. We choose what feelings we're going to respond to. I like what the author John Maxwell says about our attitudes and about the act of handling adversity. Here's a couple of things very quickly that he says. Number one, he says, no matter what your attitude, it is ultimately a choice. Your attitude is always a choice. Number 2, he says that it's easier to maintain the right attitude than to regain it. That's a powerful statement. It's easier to maintain the right attitude than to jump off the wagon and flip out and go crazy and then try to regain your composure. We want to maintain the right attitude. Number 3, he says, your attitude ultimately determines your actions. That's a spoken truth. Number 4, those that you influence, those that are looking up to you, those that are watching and mimicking your actions will reflect the attitude that you possess. The television journalist David Berkeley said this. He says, a successful man is one that can lay a firm foundation with the bricks that others throw at him. That's a basic truism, a powerful truism. And so the question that I have this morning is, how do you and I, when it comes to having the heart of forgiveness, in dealing with our feelings, how do we do in managing our feelings? How do we do when it comes time to forgive someone, and yet we're experiencing bitterness, we're experiencing resentment, we feel what it means to have revenge, we want payback, we tend to hold our grudges. How do we do in managing those feelings, and how do we do when it comes to obeying God and learning how to forgive? Forgiveness. What does it mean to forgive? And the way I want to look at this morning is by answering 2 questions. Number 1, the answer to the question, what forgiveness is not. And I think it's just as important as far as understanding what forgiveness is first of all to understand what it is not. And so we're going to look at what it means, what forgiveness is not, but then I want us to have a definition of what forgiveness really is. And I want to lay some bricks there, 2 or 3 things that kind of build a really good definition of what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. Number 1, forgiveness is not the same thing as excusing. Forgiveness is not the same thing as excusing. And I want to give us some examples. Last week, after church, I left and I was driving. I had probably the worst day driving I've ever had in my life last Sunday. I was going up I-65 up through Kentucky. There's a mile marker up there, and they've got this little billboard, this little electronic thing, and it told me that there's a multi-car crash up the road, and the interstate is shut down. I mean, closed. And so I get off, and I backtrack, and I go through a rural area, and it's about an extra 30 or 40 minutes, and I get on I-64, which is where I'm headed, going east. And I go about 40 or 50 miles, and about 150 yards before where I stopped, there is a major collision. And apparently this car coming down the westbound lane on the other side, it was raining last Sunday, was going too fast and had flown off through a curve and had gone through the median, and apparently their car had flipped and bounced about twice and then came up on the other side of the interstate and ran smack into the upper side of a tractor trailer. And the tractor trailer tried to swerve, and he rolled over, and his tractor trailer literally laid down across both lanes of traffic. Diesel and gasoline everywhere, 150 yards in front of us. And so traffic just started backing up. 12 miles, because that's how far the other exit was. And people started to just act crazy because there's 12 miles of traffic and there's no way to get out. And you've got these truckers and they're blowing their air horns and kind of getting people stirred up. And I look behind me and there's a car full of kids and mom and dad in the van, and the kids are beginning to bounce over the place, and I think, thank goodness that's not me having all those kids in there, and they're flipping out. And then there's men getting out and they're just angry because they got to get somewhere, and people are loud and rambunctious. And then we begin to see the ambulances come in, and we realize we're going to be there a while. 7:45 is when this wreck happened. They let us loose at 12:45 a.m., 5 hours. And you may think that's a long time, but let me tell you, this was mile marker 131 and a half, and my intention was to get off at mile marker 133 at the exit and get some gasoline and go to the bathroom. That makes it really difficult. And you know, I told Tracy, I said somewhere there's probably a YouTube video out there about me and 16 other tractor trailer drivers covering for each other while we take care of our business on the side of the road, you know, somewhere, because that happened several times. And I don't know what the ladies did. I really feel for them. But you know, when you look at the situation that we were in, and I don't know how many people I told this, there is absolutely nothing we can do about that. It doesn't make sense for us to get upset and point fingers and blame. We're just in a predicament. There is no excuse. There's no rationale for us to act stupid. We just kind of dealt with it. And you know, I thought, ultimately there's blessings in this. Because 20 seconds earlier, literally, that could have been me in that wreck. And so there's blessing. There's no rationale for acting crazy in some cases. Some people will say, well, you know, little 7-year-old boy at the kitchen table making rude body noises. We'll excuse a 7-year-old when they do that because that's what 7-year-old boys do, isn't it? But if a 40-year-old man tries to do the same thing, you get in trouble, don't you? Because we excuse a 7-year-old because they're immature, because they're a child. But a 40-year-old man, no, there is no excuse. So forgiving is not the same thing as excusing. Because I'll excuse the 7-year-old, but not the 40-year-old man. Forgiveness is what is needed precisely when there is no excuse, when there is no good rationale to explain away what someone did and why they did it to me. So to kind of get that to begin with, forgiveness is not the same thing as excusing. And here's my point. If you can excuse somebody for their behavior, then you don't need to forgive them. If you can excuse it, then that is not a matter of forgiveness. It's excusable. It's excusable. It's explainable. Number 2, forgiveness is not the same thing as forgetting. All it takes to forget a little bit is old age. The day will come when you begin to forget. Forgiving is not the same thing as forgetting. Forgiveness is what you have to do when you cannot forget. Sometimes God calls us to forgive somebody of something that we cannot forget what they did. And God says what you need to do is quit worrying about trying to forget it because you're not going to. You need to step into an act of forgiveness and deliberately, intentionally pray God's blessings upon them and forgive them because you can't forget. And that's one of the reasons it is so important for us as God's children to watch our actions, but to also watch our words. Because someone said one time, you need to be careful of the words that come through your mouth because once they are said, they can only be forgiven but not forgotten. And so our words and our actions are both powerful. Sometimes we forgive simply because we can't forget. And then number 3, forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciling. Because I've heard it for many years where people said, you know, the person that I left, the family that I left, the person that hurt me, there is no way in the world that I can go back to him. I'm going to go back to him. I will never be friends with them again. And you know what? Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes acts are so rash and so hurtful that you can't reconcile. A couple of weeks ago, I was reading some of the story of televangelist and writer Joyce Meyer. And part of her story is the last 5 years that she lived at home with her parents, her father raped and sodomized her more than 200 times. And you look at what this woman does nowadays in serving God, and there has been radical forgiveness offered in her life. She would never want to go back to her father. I understand that. But for her sake, God taught her what it means to be forgiveness and to allow the power of forgiveness to reign in her life. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciling either again. Perhaps it's a marriage where someone is hurt or beaten or abused. Perhaps it's a business partner where somebody has cheated or robbed you. Forgiveness is what needs to happen in the heart of one person. It only takes, listen to me, it only takes one person in a conflict with two people. It only takes one of you to enact the act of forgiveness. It takes both of you to reconcile. And literally, there are some of us that need to step out in faith and forgive someone that we have never been reconciled to. Literally, you can go to the graveyard and forgive someone that died years ago. Forgiveness is what happens in your heart. Reconciling is what happens when God has the ability to bring you back together, even under unlikely circumstance. You can do forgiveness totally by yourself. And so the question is, after this, what is forgiveness? I've described what it is not. Number one, it is a decision. Number one, it is a decision to try not to inflict an equal or greater amount of pain on the person that has hurt me. Forgiveness begins when I give up the quest to get even. Forgiveness begins when I give up the right to get back at you. The problem with getting even is this. The problem with getting even is who decides what's even. And think about it. There are plenty of examples, not only in our personal lives, but in the world, where people have been trying to get even for years. And who decides at the moment comes when you're even again? How long have been the Palestinians and the Israelis been trying to get equal with each other, or get even with each other? How long have the Iraqis and the Kurds been trying to get even with each other? Or the Serbs and the Bosnians? Or on the streets of LA, the Bloods and the Crips? Who decides that moment when I get revenge at you that we're even now, call it quits? It never ends. And so forgiveness is a decision that says, I'm going to end it right now. Not with equality, but with forgiveness. It's a decision, an intentional decision. Colossians 3:13 says this, don't be angry with each other, but forgive each other. If you feel someone has wronged you, what is it? 2 words. Say it with me. Forgive them. Forgive them. Forgive others. Why? Not because they deserve it. Not because you could have excused it. Not because it didn't mean anything to you. No, forgive others because the Lord forgave you. Amen? Number 2, it is a new way of seeing and feeling. And I don't know if you have ever experienced this, but when someone hurts you, when someone takes something that belongs to you and takes it away from you, when someone spreads a rumor about you, when someone has gotten at your neck and their intention is to harm you or destroy you, when you see that person the next time around and you see them out there, and maybe you make eye contact, maybe you don't, maybe you just see them. But when you see them, what you don't see is a person there. What you see and what you feel is the hurt that they caused in your life. Do you know what I'm talking about? When you see that person, all of a sudden your blood pressure rises. All of a sudden there's a sense of anger, and you see what that person did to you. Forgiveness is a new way of seeing and feeling. Forgiveness is the ability to not only not sense that anger, but to look and realize the person that hurt, there they are. I see them. Yeah, it hurts, but that's a human being. Ephesians says this, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. And do not give, for your own benefit, do not give the devil a foothold. Do not give the devil a foothold. Number 3, forgiveness is, this is a big step, forgiveness is a matter of wishing the other person well. It's a point that you come out where you're no longer hoping that the only phone calls that person's going to get are from telemarketers. You wish them well. It's not wishing on them any longer that they're going to get audited by their taxes this week. No, I'm not wishing that on them either. It's wishing them well. It's not hoping that their car breaks down or their tire goes flat during the middle of rush hour. No, you can now see someone that is hurting and hurt you, and you can say something good about them. You can say something positive about them. You can say something encouraging to them. And you wish them well. And why? Psalms 103 says it this way, as far as the east is from the west, so far has He removed our transgressions from us. How can I but wish that upon every other person in the world, even those who may have transgressed against me. David says it right. David says it right. So he has removed and forgiven our sin. Someone asked the question, why does God command us to forgive? Because the honest truth is, forgiveness is hard, isn't it? It's hard when someone has hurt you. It's hard when you know they did what they did or said what they did, and they did it on purpose. Their intent was to hurt you. But let me give you some reasons why God says you need to forgive. You need to forgive. Number one, because it's the best way to live. It's absolutely the best way to live. The worst way to live is to walk around with grudges inside your heart for the rest of your life, being angry, being resentful, being jealous, holding grudges against other people. That is not the way God intended us to live. Number one, it's the best way to live. Number two, because ultimately He has forgiven us. He is the great forgiver. And think about it. The person that has harmed you, you only know what they did to you. God is only asking you to forgive them of what they did to you. Jesus Christ, the Son of God and God Himself, knows everything that you've done. And He's the great forgiver. And if God can forgive us of everything that He's done, He's simply asking you and I to forgive one another for what we've done to one another. He's given the great example. He's asking you to take the simple steps of forgiveness. Number three, because the only other way to remain is to be a prisoner of my hurt and my pain. And how many people do we know that that's exactly where they're living? They're living with a broken heart. They're living with the grudges of 20 years bygone. They're living with the hurt and pain of actions that really don't mean anything, and they just hang on to them. Don't you know people that are addicted to being angry? They just want to have something to complain, and their life is painful. It's the worst way to live. Number four, to not forgive is to refuse to forgive means that I allow the one that hurt me to keep me chained in the shackles of bitterness and resentment. Very similar to what I said earlier. That's not the way God wants us to live. But ultimately, number five, no human beings are more miserable than the unforgiving. God wants us to live in the joy of His forgiveness. Blessed decisions. Include God in every relationship that you have in your life. If you don't, I guarantee you the devil's going to trap you. He will trap you. He will find a way. And then number three, trust God and live by faith, not by your feelings. And that, I'm telling you, that's a challenge. That is a challenge. To let those